months worth of neuroscience that I'm going to give you in about 20 minutes. And it really will help explain a lot of how you interpret life, why you react the way you react, and how you can change that. Would you like that? Okay, great. Let's get started. All right. So I want you to imagine that this is a side view of your head. There's your eye. So the economy of the brain is entirely dependent on what you focus your attention on. Okay. So the brain has two gears. Its number one gear, it's like jumping into a car and it's already preset. The number one gear of the brain is safety. So in other words, what the brain is interested in is reducing anything that you might perceive as a threat. So if you were invited right now to come up and present to this room full of people, some of you would say, yay, great, let's go, let's do this, this is going to be fun. And others might come up and say, holy crap, you've got to be kidding, all eyes on me. And so my brain would be saying in that second scenario, this is a threat for me. And I'm going to show you what happens depending on how you interpret a situation. Okay? The second, once the brain knows it's safe, then it'll allow you to look forward and go and maximise things that you find rewarding. So when there's anything new, anything unexpected, anything that you didn't plan for, your brain will always interpret it first as a threat until you understand that it's not. Does that make sense? Okay. So when you're in this space, you will hear your language. You will use words that start with, I don't want. So, for example, I don't want to fail. I don't want to appear a fool. I don't want to be rejected. Notice where my focus and attention is. It's on the very thing I don't want, right? It's like me saying to you right now, don't think about a purple elephant. Don't think about it. Guess what? You already do, right? This is how it works. So when you get up and say, I don't want to be nervous, look at where you're focusing your attention. You're already there, right? Point number one. When you're on this side, you will say, this is your language, and notice your focus. You will say, I want. So notice, if I'm in a car and I say I want to go somewhere, which way am I going, forward or backwards? Forward, right? So I'm actually looking forward. When I'm saying I don't want to go there, what am I doing? I'm avoiding or pushing away from something. So you can see there's two motivations for the brain. To motivate behaviour, you can either motivate it through threat or fear, or you can motivate it through reward or what's called toward motivation. What's the difference? The difference is this. I work with a lot of people who have cancer and leukemia and their families. And the very first question I ask them is, what do you want? And I'll hear one of two answers. Either, I don't want to die, or I want to live. Sounds like the same outcome, but completely different neural pathways, right? If I focus on what I don't want, I'm more likely to attract it because of the chemistries that result from it. So this is how it works. So there's lots of functions in the brain, but there's only two that I'm going to cover with you today. So the major thinking part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex. You'll also hear it referred to as your executive function. It's located just behind the forehead, and it's responsible for all your conscious processing. So things like decision-making, problem-solving, learning new information, recalling information. It's all the active stuff you do with information happens here. Right in the centre of the brain is what I call the emotional centre of the brain. It's called the limbic system. And the limbic system is responsible for producing certain chemicals that have a particular impact on the quality of your thinking, your capacity to think, and therefore your behaviours. So this is how it works. When you're in this space and everything's going to plan, the limbic system produces a chemical which does this. That chemical there is called dopamine, And it's the chemical that allows you to pay attention and keep your focus on what you're doing. Okay? So it actually feeds your capacity to do all those things like decision-making, problem-solving, learning new information, recalling information. So if you sat in here and you were feeling really nervous, I don't know if I'm going to understand this information, I don't know if I'm going to get it, you're focusing on that. That's why at the beginning I said to you, keep your mind open and be curious, because when you do that, you're actually opening up this space, right? You're not putting pressure on yourself. But as we know, how many days do we have that go to plan? Right? Doesn't happen. So what happens is, if I perceive something that's going on in the room as a threat, the limbic system produces a different chemical which does this. Right? Now that chemical there is called cortisol. You may have heard of it before. Essentially, it's the stress chemical. All right? Now what you'll notice, the first thing it goes and disrupts is what? The prefrontal cortex. So all of a sudden, when something you perceive is a threat, it disrupts your capacity to think clearly. You're not going to make quality decisions. It's going to be hard to problem solve. It's going to be hard to learn anything new, let alone recall information that you know you know. Does that make sense? So when you're under pressure and your boss is standing over you saying, come on, Josie, I haven't got all day. What's the answer? You're seeing it as a threat and it's not helping you to respond, right? The other thing you'll see is that, so it floods your prefrontal cortex and then it floods the rest of your brain, goes into your brainstem, down your spinal column, and now into your nervous system. So what you're going to notice is your heart rate's going to go up, your breathing's going to change. So instead of breathing from your abdomen, there's going to be a lot more of that kind of breathing. And you'll also start sweating a little more than usual. That's when you know you've got a lot of this going on. Over time, we're getting used to extended periods of chronic stress in the system. Over time, what that can do is we produce another special hormone in the small intestine called serotonin. Who knows what serotonin is for? Sleeping. It's also used as antidepressants. Okay, and the reason people get diagnosed with depression is because there's too much of this and it eats up our serotonin levels. So all of a sudden, we don't have that feeling of equilibrium about life. So what you want to do is, if you're going to use a supplement, do it for a small amount of time, but find out what the cause of this is. Okay? Now, I said before that it depends on how you interpret that information. So depending on what I pay attention to will deliver my perception of reality. And perception's your reality, right? But perception is also only an interpretation of what you're paying attention to. Does that make sense? So here's what did my head in, okay? A thought is a thought, not a fact. And for the big feelers in the room, you're feeling. A feeling is a feeling. It's not a fact. But it feels real, doesn't it? So I'm going to show you one more thing and then I'm going to break and ask you to just talk about it because I want you to remember this.